And welcome into another victory edition of Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle of 1053 The Fan. Thank you so much for listening and supporting Spits and Suds. Got a good one for you tonight. Stars win. Whew, it was a close one. Harley scores with 5 seconds left as they beat, kind of a tough New Jersey team. Short-handed, of course, but they did get Jacob Markstrom back. He played pretty well for the Devils, but the good guys come out on top by the score of 4-3. And joining us tonight, and this is why it's going to be a good episode, the greatness, and I mean greatness, of David Castillo of DE Magazine and also the Substack Stars Stack. How are you, my friend?
I don't know why you address me like I'm like Van Damme or Dolph Lundgren. I mean, I appreciate it. It's flattering, but it's just, come on. We know like who the weak link of this show is, and it's definitely me.
Oh, I thought you were going to throw someone else's under the bus.
Like, what?
Like definitely Tiffin. It's got to be Tiffin, right?
It's got to be Sean. Hey, that really awesome guy from EP Reading Site, Cam Robinson, he's a chump.
Well, first off, listen, the fact that there was not a Justin Dowling tribute is quite sad at the American Airlines Center.
I want to say credit to him, but if we're being honest, like, listen, New Jersey like has to improve their depth. Like Justin Dowling does not belong on a serious roster. But credit to him. The dude was an animal for the Texas Stars for a lot of years.
Sure was. Yeah, absolutely. This was interesting. The first half, the Stars were in control, playing really well, and then New Jersey just hanging around. And then, at times New Jersey became the, better team, and Casey DeSmith had to come up with some big saves, and New Jersey comes back all the way to tie it at 3. And then Harley becomes the hero with just seconds remaining. Just a good night for the faithful as far as kind of a fun game to watch. A lot of power play activity. Devils going 2 for 2. Stars, after such power play success, it's like we're almost complaining because we were only 1 for 5 on the power play after their recent success of 6 to 7. So it was just a quality. David, I know New Jersey's kind of shorthanded, but at the same time, these wins against these are teams that are either in the playoffs or fighting to get in the playoffs.
Well, I mean, I always have to like recoup because you tend to throw me curveballs. Like the first player we talked about is not like Thomas Harley or Hintz, but Justin Dowling.
Of course. I was sitting on that one all night, by the way.
Oh God. I think so. When it comes to Dallas, I do think there is a little bit of perspective, and this is going to sound negative. It's really not. But what you're seeing with the Stars is really a Stars team that is outscoring their problems. Like I said, I think that tends to have a negative connotation because it's like, oh, well, what's wrong with the defense? Not necessarily. Like if you're outscoring your problems, you're winning games. So that's the positive. But I mean, I think it's something like 4 goals in the last like 8 games, like 4 goals 4 goals in the last 8 games, something like that, something really crazy. And of course, a big part of that has been the power play. So I think it's a good sign insofar as you want to see Dallas's offense rolling. But as we've seen with these games, like not just New Jersey, but like the St. Louis game was really some very porous defense on Dallas's part. Mm-hmm. You kind of do wonder, kind of what this calibration is going to look like when it really gets down to the marrow. And of course, obviously the health is the biggest factor, but Dallas is not doing this not winning these games without some drama.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the mighty scoring ability of Ilya Lyubushkin. Boy, it was so cool to see the excitement of his teammates, even more than Ilya himself. But let's give credit when you haven't scored in, you would never know that he hadn't scored in 173 games from that shot. That was a beauty.
Yeah, it had a real sort of, do you remember the beautiful Roman Polak goal? Like his first season with
yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like when he scored, I'm like, what is it with Dallas? Like bringing in these absolute like cement block, cement block foot defensemen, shutdown types that score like goals that you would see from like a Nikita Kucherov.
Right.
Um, and of course, Lyubushkin is actually like quite an adept skater. So I was just throwing him in there. But yes, that was my first thought.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, they're just finding. You're right. They're finding different ways to win, and there is some drama, in there. I guess the question is where are they as they head into the trade deadline? Jim Nill has made it very clear numerous times that moves that will happen will deal with a UFA if he holds to that. I was a little surprised ESPN was bringing up Maverick Bork in a trade, like maybe they're showcasing him tonight, because
Oh
Jim
God.
Nill has said several times that that is not the intention to trade a Bork or a Stankoven, clearly a Wyatt Johnston or a Liam Bichel. He's keeping this young core intact. So a little surprised, but I mean, that's what happens in national broadcasts too.
Wait a minute. Are you surprised that a national broadcast would not necessarily vet the quality? I mean, this is a broadcast that has Dave Jackson on it. So
Yeah.
listen, I'm not going to be. I don't feel like being diplomatic tonight, or really like with ESPN in general, because you saw, like, to me, and it's not necessarily that people are bad at their jobs. It's just the same. It's the soundboard. It's the hockeyisms. It's the hockey culture that just kind of permeates throughout the broadcast. Right? They were talking about. They were still peddling the narrative that, oh man, Thomas Harley looked really good at the Four Nations, but
Yeah.
I don't think it was his talent. I think it was veteran Drew Doughty, who's been like on a decline for this season, and has only had like 8 games. Really, really like Gas and Harley. That's why Harley was so good, because he had a veteran who's not what he once was, buffering his game. Like, get the hell out of here.
Right. Right. Yeah. And speaking of Harley, I guess one of the things that I'll ask you is, great to see him get that goal in the closing seconds, but am should I be worried about the number of minutes that Thomas Harley is logging?
Yes, because, well, okay, so yes and no. Yes, because this is what happened um, in last year's playoffs, right? You had defensemen like Heiskanen that were playing way too much. There was the whole 5 defenseman thing, right, in the Edmonton series, and
Right.
that really caught up to them. I mean, that's just the physical reality of a game this intense, and especially against like upper level competition. So I think it's something that maybe won't be the kind of worst thing for Harley. But I think it was Robert Tiffin that had kind of written a piece on at his Substack, Star Thoughts, about Harley admitting, "I'm tired." Yeah,
Yeah.
he just flat out said, like, "I'm exhausted." Didn't actually say exhausted, but nonetheless, that was the implication. And so I think for the regular season, you can get away with stuff like that from time to time. But I don't think it's something that um, like. There is a cost in the playoffs to that kind of thing. Now, are we likely to see it if Heiskan's back? No, but I think it is worth being careful. I mean, what are the chances? And this is just my personal opinion. This is not necessarily. What are the chances that I guess, like, even though I don't have a problem with it, like now here and there, the one thing I would say is that Dallas is pretty much locked in to a first round matchup with either Minnesota or Colorado.
Yes.
Yes, there's a remote chance they can catch Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is definitely a team that's lost several games in a row. And I think Winnipeg is also a team that I think they have like more issues than you hear national telecasts talk about it, like their even strength offense. However, still, this is a team that's probably going to get a lot better at the trade deadline. Again, like Dallas would need to make up a lot of ground. So I just feel like, who cares? Like, yes, you want to win games, but you don't want it to come at the cost of anything. So I don't like it, but I also don't necessarily see major harm, at least in the regular season.
Wyatt Johnston gets the Stars on the board, just 139 in with a leaving the zone. And wow. I don't know why, David, but like I knew Wyatt Johnston, obviously skilled, good two-way player. Maybe it's because we haven't seen a lot of Wyatt Johnston in open ice as far as that breakout speed he had tonight. Just passing by the Devils, and Dougie Hamilton and others just couldn't catch up.
So you need to interview Luke Chilcote. He is the star skating coach, and kind of really comes across as sort of another kind of Barb Underhill, who was the skating coach that really improved and identified the lace bite that Mason Marchman suffered from, to kind of really sort of get his skate into a much more functional place. And so that to me is huge because, and I was talking about this with Dmitry Filipovich on his podcast, about just the improvement in Johnson's skating. And I felt like you had even noticed a little bit of it last year when he seemed more agile, but now he's just like flat out fast at times. And I think you've seen plays like that. This was just the most dramatic example.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really impressive, and knowing where to put it on Jacob Markstrom, and you know, maybe it's because they're in the Eastern Conference, but I kind of feel for New Jersey. Like just when they get Jacob Markstrom back, they lose Hughes, which is just a big loss for them.
Well, I mean, the issue with New Jersey is that they're a team that they still kind of lack depth, and like some of the guys that you expected to really kind of level up, like Dawson Mercer, did not. And then you have kind of the struggles of like Timo Meyer, and their defense also has been like injured a lot as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Even before Dougie Hamilton got back, that was a big injury. Siegenthaler, that was a big injury. And so they're playing prospects that they clearly weren't comfortable bringing up this early, like, Nemitz. And I mean, Luke Hughes is already like a proven defender at this point. But nonetheless, I think they're probably a team that would have preferred to maybe kind of ease these guys into the lineup, and just didn't get a chance to. So kind of like Dallas, they're competing with a lot of young players. But the difference is that, New Jersey doesn't have quality goaltending, and they just don't have the offensive depth.
Yeah. You mentioned playing either Minnesota or Colorado. It's kind of interesting that, Colorado now the number one wild card, just 2 points back of Minnesota. So you're right. Easily could play Colorado in the first round. If you had a choice, who would you rather see?
Ah, man, that's it's funny because they're such different teams. I
Yes, they
think
are.
I think for a Dallas team that is struggling defensively, and again, when I talk about defense, I'm talking about defense away from goaltending. Goals against is not the same as defense. It like that just riles me to no end. But
Right.
anyways, so I think given that, I would say Minnesota, because they're less likely to exploit Dallas's current weakness. And again, I say
Right.
current because we don't know when Heisman's going to come back.
Yeah.
But man, it's like Colorado like getting worse, bringing in the Ryan Lindgren, a move I just did not like. As fans didn't like it, especially for what they gave up. Like I just don't know what Colorado is doing right now. Nature's has been great, but
You know what? I'm raising my hand. I was right about that.
well, hold on. What did you say?
I'm pumping my tires because everyone was saying that Colorado was fleeced. And my thing is yes, you gave up a great player, but that great player clearly it seemed was not going to re-sign in Colorado, or they couldn't come to a deal. So they got a player having a great season, and he's been consistently good, and he has an extra year on the contract. And Natchez, 5 points in the last 5 games, 68 points on the year. So it wasn't like you were just giving up Ranton and not getting anything in return. Martin Natchez has turned out to be a really solid NHL player. He's only 26 years old.
Yeah, I think. Plus, also the just kind of you've seen the complete opposite. Granted, I think Ranton has been really good in Carolina. He's just been unlucky, but it's definitely a better fit for Natchez, who's kind of more of a north-south player to begin with, and that's kind of what you're seeing there. And so yeah, like I don't think Minnesota and Colorado are serious threats to Dallas. However, it's still worth emphasizing, right? For all of Dallas's current success, Um, if they go into a first round without Heiskanen and Sagan, that's still like a tough road. I mean, that's still a tough matchup, like all things considered.
Sure.
Again, I think it's very winnable. However, I think it's a very, very tough matchup, especially if, say, Minnesota, has a fully healthy Kaprizov and
Yeah.
some of their guys on defense are brought back.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is tonight started with Stankoven for the second straight game on the top line. Bork was getting some top line minutes. I'm not seeing Evgeny Dodonov, and I thought Dodonov with Hintz and Robertson was actually a pretty good trio.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like we tend to focus on prospects are always the first ones to get bloody, right? When it comes to punishment, making mistakes, eating scratches as a result. But I mean, Dodonov has struggled, man. I think lately,
True.
again, still like has been solid throughout the year, but he's had his own issues, and I think that's why even though I would be kind of fine with that, I think it's always just kind of more interesting to sort of see if especially players who have not yet reached their ceilings, like Stankoven and Bork, to kind of see what they do. And I always liked Bork on that top unit. Anyways, I thought they didn't score a whole lot, but they had really strong like underlying numbers, fantastic share of expected goals or shot quality, and so I didn't mind that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. With the trade deadline nearing on Friday, we'll talk about it obviously the next couple of days. I just don't know who would be out there that I'm looking at as an unrestricted free agent, which fits the Dallas model that could be that top 4 defenseman.
I mean, there is. I mean, I think actually he doesn't count because he's not a UFA. I forgot about that. I was gonna say Connor Murphy, but
Yeah.
he has another year. So basically, you're looking at David Savard.
Yeah, that's what
and
I was going to say.
and at that point this is like another.
It's just a guy.
Yeah, this is another CC. It's another Dumba. Maybe in like if he catches like lightning in a bottle, he's another Lyubushkin, but he's just not that at all. And I don't think, and he hasn't been that for a while. So yeah, like and plus, who comes if you add a right shot defenseman? Let's say they did somehow make a move for someone that's actually kind of still decent, like Connor Murphy. Who are you taking out? What is your top 6? Name me the top 6, Gavin. You bring in Connor Murphy, he goes into the top 6. Heiskanen comes back. What does your top 6 look like?
Okay. All right. So if Murphy's inserted and Heiskanen comes back, it would be Heiskanen, Harley, Lindell, CC. Wow.
Exactly.
Great point. Yeah. I mean, because you're not going to sit Bischel. The one thing you could do is try moving Bischel up for more minutes.
And that's what I don't understand about a lot of this kind of like, rumor mill like nonsense. I'm like, is Nil like he may call a mulligan on Dumba, but like you're not going to call a mulligan on Lyubushkin as well. And not just because he's played like moderately well,
Yeah.
but because you're not going to, I mean, these are both guys with term left after this season. So, I mean, I think the other thing too is that, but to your point about Bischel, which is that I would actually love to see them just go 4 left-handed defensemen. Harley, Heiskanen, and Bichsel with Lindell on his offside.
Yeah.
I just, to me, those are the 4 best defensemen. And I don't see why. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think Bichsel has just been really, really good. He's the player that he showed himself to be in the AHL, where I thought he was excellent, and he's not missed a beat. He's every bit as confident, not just handling the puck, but making decisions, processing the play. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm like, well, what exactly is the long-term outlook of this left side, right? So basically, Heiskanen is never going to be, put on a strong side. Okay, we've accepted that. And so Big Still is just going to be a third pairing defenseman for as long as Lindell's on the lineup.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you, and it's so interesting because a couple of things stand out from tonight's game. One, as far as the sixth defenseman, he was on the ice the least amount of time, which is 13:47, but in that time, 6 hits. So obviously exerting his physicality. I thought he had a couple of nice rushes. Yeah, I think to me, I think he fits real well. I do. I know it's not a long-term grab, but I think we can look back at the Cody Cece deal now and say, you know what, that really has helped this team.
I'm not going to go there. Like I mean, and this is not like, listen, I am obviously rooting for Cody Cece. Like I want to see him work. I want to see him have success. I want to see him have chemistry with
Yeah.
some of the Dallas players. But it doesn't change. This is kind of one of the things that we were the same thing that people criticized Colorado for doing, adding Ryan Lindgren. It's like, well, what do you, just because you have money to spend does not mean you're adding value if you spend it. And so to me, that's always the question. Like, are you adding value? And so I'm not going to belabor this point because it's not going to be very popular. Cece's not a good player. Like can he take shifts? Sure. A lot of players can give you shifts. And that's why, even though it sounds like this rumor was totally dispelled, I don't know if you saw that. Like I was the idiot that sort of like kind of fell for it. Although the guy that started it was, he's like a legit guy that covers the Canucks, but supposedly Dallas, in on a deal for Pius Suter from Vancouver, who's a really solid player. But where was I going with this? So anyways, like a guy like Suter, this case, a solid middle six dude who adds value, I'd be cool with that. I'd totally be cool with that. Because again, you're adding value. So to me, especially for a contender, right, where these sort of moves in the margins kind of make a difference. I think that's you make a move to get better, and that's that's the end of it. So listen, I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna beat up on CC because the charts. Because I've been watching the charts instead of the games, and they all look bad. Just that, we saw what happened to this guy against Dallas, right, in the playoffs.
Right.
When he was paired with Darnell Nurse, they got destroyed. I have a hard time, and again, it's not really about, I think that CC's just like the worst player in the world. No, he's not. Of course not. And he does some things well. But it's just when you have him paired with a player like Lindell, this was the same criticism we had with Yanni Hakanpää, right? When it was Hakanpää with Lindell, yeah, they could defend reasonably well, but they were still a weak link on the blue line because they only had one mode, which was to defend. They couldn't necessarily control territory or push offense. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Again, I don't want to be like overly negative. That's not like what I'm trying to do. It's just that, my opinion will change when the facts change, but the facts have been throughout his career, not a legit top four defender.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask, and it's tough when your team is 7-2-1 in their last 10, winners of 3 straight. Winnipeg lost tonight. So, a little bit of catching up, 6 points back. Boy, that seems like it's like right on the doorstep with how Winnipeg has had this lead. But the Stars playing such great hockey right now. But one of the things I like about this podcast is we can have constructive criticism. I asked Robert actually the other day, Robert Tiffin, starsthoughts.com, at Robert Tiffin. I just asked him, am I crazy or what? Why is Oscar Beck not getting a healthy scratch? And Robert's reply was the coaching staff really likes his size. But at the same time, I like Blackwell's grit. I'm just not seeing, like, I think he's fine out there, but I don't think Oscar Beck, like when I look at him statistically, he's not blowing me away. What are your thoughts?
I'm right there with you. At last, we can agree on something. It's also just like so weird to like, it kind of feels like one step away from catcalling. Oh, Oscar Beck, I love his size. Well, yeah, sure. He can't change that though. He's a big dude. That's has nothing to do with whether or not he is, skilled and controls territory, which he has elements of that. But that's why I kind of really actually dug the rumor. Again, it is just a rumor, that Dallas might be in on Pew Suter, because he's a smaller guy, but this is a guy that's got like 83 goals in like only 200 games in the NHL. Hasn't had like a huge shot, a real like big shot. So the point being that I don't care how big a guy is, he has to add value if he's, and especially lower in the lineup, where I think someone like, you're right, someone like Colin Blackwell has a higher offensive ceiling. So yeah, I'm just, and also, Oscar Beck doesn't really leverage his size. Yeah, so I 100% agree. Like
Yeah.
I was surprised he actually ate a healthy scratch. I'd be more surprised if that happens more consistently, but I think it should, because I just don't think he makes the cut. And that's not a criticism. It's just, well, Dallas is a really deep team. And I think if I'm going into, game 7 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, where, every shift matters and every bounce matters, I would love, let's say Sagan returns and your fourth line is, I don't know, Bork, Steele, and Dodonov. Like
Yeah.
that to me is a line that can get those random
Sure
breaks,
can.
those lucky bounces. Whereas Oscar Beck just doesn't. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
he's Radic Faxa to me, man.
But by the way, you wrote my name but did not tag me the other day. I saw, so I was going through tweets and I saw this when the Blue Jackets and Matthew Olivier are closing in on a long-term contract, and David says mentions me as a guy that would be sad because I want him on the team, which by the way is true. So David knows me well. That's give me a Matthew Olivier on my fourth line.
I mean, I'm surprised. Well, I mean, for one, like I feel like tagging people is always kind of like bad form in general. Like insofar as people are on Twitter to begin with, which is of course bad for my health, really bad for all of our health. But that I always feel like it's in bad form to tags, because if a bunch of people start replying and you're just blowing up your notifications, you may not necessarily want that kind of smoke. So I was giving you room, Gavin. I was giving you space. I was giving you your space.
I
And
absolutely
that's
loved it. I saw it and I started laughing. I was like, boy, that is greatness. Yeah, it appears as though he is going to sign a long-term contract with the Blue Jackets, and good for him for that reason. So wanted to ask you a couple things before we go. Did you see, despite his brother Matthew being out for his physicality, did you see Brady Tkachuk dropping the gloves the other night against Tom Wilson?
oh god, I'm assuming he got destroyed.
No, pretty good.
Okay, all right.
Held his own. Held his own. I just thought it was interesting. Like, and from this standpoint, the Stars are not a fighting team, clearly, but it's fascinating to me, and maybe they can't say so, but should the Sens step in and say, Brady, we're finally in a playoff spot. If you can, just hold off. We can't lose you.
I would say, it's a nice thought, and it's a thought that I agree with, but it's also, the whole like leopard can't change their spots kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you ever sort of gave Brady the sense that he couldn't be who he was on the ice, well, then you never know what other parts of the game that might affect. And so I think that's kind of that's part of what you accept with the Tkachuk brothers, which is they're going to play their way, legality be damned, or or prudence be damned. And that's the kind of players. I mean, they play so efficiently and effectively, not just physically, but also in terms of talent, precisely because they're willing to kind of take those gambles. And so I mean, if I were a GM, I would definitely be just caution, but at the same time, like that's part of why he's on your team to begin with, because he's willing to do that.
Yeah. Ottawa, 1 point out of the wild card right now. They do have a game in hand. I mean, unbelievable. The New York Rangers, as of tonight, are the second wild card team. Wow. That is just shocking that New York has come all the way back. Columbus is the number one wild card team. To me, they're one of the better stories in the NHL with what happened to Gaudreau, making the coaching change, just a lot of situation in Columbus. For them to be in the playoff mix is really, really impressive. The one thing as we go around the NHL, David, is if I'm Don Sweeney, the general manager of the Boston Bruins, you have to be in sell mode at this point. Yes, they're just 2 points out of the wild card, but losers of 2 in a row, 3-5-2 in their last 10. They're just not looking good.
I mean, who could have foreseen that Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov were not the answers to a team that needed offense?
Yeah.
Who could have seen that, Gavin?
David Castillo.
Besides, well, I mean, really, it's like everybody. Everybody was like, what is Boston doing? But I mean, that's kind of what happens when you sort of don't commit. To me, this is part of the issue with a lot of teams, which is that they just can't accept when sort of the when the magic's gone. And this is a team that has lost their core over the years. Even Brad Marchand has kind of finally hit that sort of inevitable decline. And so just like when Vancouver decided to extend Miller to a full term, despite them missing the playoffs that season, Boston kind of not realizing that, hey, maybe we need to, maybe we just need to accept that the only way we're going to become great again is if, we're able to sell and just start drafting well. And yeah, so not a whole lot to say, man. They made the wrong decisions in the offseason, and the chickens are coming home to roost.
Let me throw this name out. Rasmus Ristolainen, Philadelphia Flyers.
Are you throwing him out because this is a Dallas trade scenario?
Yeah,
man. Ristolainen is, for those that maybe don't follow as much kind of non-Dallas Stars hockey, for the longest time, Ristolainen was sort of just absolutely just taking over the coals for being a poor player, awful analytics, and just not the player that GMs thought he was. And then of course that changed. Under Tortorella, his numbers are amazing. All those fancy stats that you say I shouldn't pay attention to are fantastic, and he just kind of looks like a player reborn. And so, even though he still has issues handling the puck, I think he would be fantastic. That's exactly the kind of guy that I think Dallas should have been looking at least before they made the commitment to Lindell. And so it's tough. I don't know that bringing in Ristolainen, even in this offseason, necessarily is impossible, though, right? I mean, he's only $5 million, so
2 more years after this year.
So they would basically have to accept the loss of one of Ben or Sagan.
Yes.
Sorry, Ben or Duchesne.
Right. Yes.
But I would be all aboard that.
Yeah. I mean, you're getting a top 4 defenseman. So, just throwing it out there.
I mean, are you throwing it out there because the Finnish mafia is becoming a meme now instead of something serious, or because you actually like the name?
No, we can close on this, bud. I go back and forth with Sean about this, Sean Shapiro, regarding, is this current makeup one that can hoist the cup, or do they have to change up the makeup of this team? And it's not I have nothing against Jamie Benn, amazing captain, his dedication toward the Stars, the long-term contract that he signed. All that said, at some point, if you're reaching conference final and then another conference final, and however far they go this year, to me, you have to change the makeup of the team, even at the expense it might make you worse. You have to take that chance. That's what Florida did. They knew they had to change, and they did, and they took home a cup. So that's what I'm saying as far as you have to give something to get, and maybe giving up a Jamie Benn, even though Jim Nill has said that's not going to happen. And I would hate to lose Matt Duchene, especially this upcoming year where Nashville has the most on the books for this final year. I'd sign him to another 1-year deal. Hopefully he would agree to that. But, there has to be some point where, you have to change up the makeup, but I guess that can be talked about after this season.
Well, I think it's a really great point, and I think it's what makes this season such an inflection point for the vision that Jim Nill has, which is that for the longest time, his game plan has been to build through the draft and to preach patience. This is they are Jim Nill is the anti-McCrimmon. He's not Vegas, and so far, that's gotten them to 2 Western Conference Finals. Not bad, but it's not a Stanley Cup. So if Dallas does not win the Cup, if they don't even go to this Western Conference Finals, then you'd have to reconsider what exactly the best course of action is, because you can't do both, right? You got to choose one or the other,
right?
And so either you're just gonna ride the process and stick to the game plan of continuing to build through the draft, being patient, managing the cap, and trying to win that way, or you're gonna say, hey, like this is part of why you hit on draft picks to begin with, is that you don't just have players who can contribute on ELC contracts, but you also have potential trade chips, and that you can always sort of mix and move players to get better where the team needs to get better. And I would have said, the blue line was exactly that, is exactly what they needed to. Now, do I think this is the year that Dallas can win the Cup? Honestly, no. And I don't necessarily think that's because there are just like a lot of better teams, but just the injuries are going to naturally kind of again, we don't know, maybe Sagan comes back, in the second round, and maybe Heiskanen comes back in the regular season. We just, that kind of really, I think that is kind of what maybe sort of makes me a little less kind of confident, more than who this team is at full power. But it's really hard if they get Minnesota or Colorado in the first round. Not a big deal, but then have to deal with Winnipeg in round 2. And even though I don't think Edmonton is all that, you're likely looking at, the winner of Edmonton and Vegas, and then of course, right, whoever comes out top in the Eastern Conference, which is likely Florida again. I don't think Dallas can beat that Florida team. I just don't.
I know everyone's going to tell me they have to prove it, but I do not want to play Winnipeg this year.
I mean, I like, one thing I'll say, right? And I know people bring up the Connor Hellebuyck stuff, like, oh, a choker hasn't proven. Yes, that's true. However, don't tempt fate here. I mean, but I think a lot of that too is also really small sample size. Winnipeg, you could say it's on him that they've been ousted early on. I don't think it is. I think for the longest time, Winnipeg has just had some really bad teams, and Hellebuyck just kind of ran out of gas.
Right.
You're not going to have that situation this year. I think it's less about Hellebuyck, turning into a pumpkin, all of a sudden, and more about like, they have like the development of Dylan Sandberg is huge. Like having a number 1 shutdown defender just kind of develop out of nowhere has been huge for the blue line. And then of course their offense, right? The increased excellence of like Perfetti and Velarde, and this is a team that I think is going to have like 10 to 12 million in cap to kind of spend at the deadline. Probably going to get a center, Brock Nelson. I'm sure somebody that they're looking at, and it's that is, and this is a power play that has been humming along all season.
Yes,
not like Dallas, which has been great, and I think this top unit, I wrote about it at the Star Stack today about how truly dangerous this new top unit is with Harley and Duchene. But again, like Winnipeg, has has that history with that unit. So I would be surprised if Dallas was able to beat them.
Right. Per Taylor Baird of NHL.com, Ilya Lyubushkin was asked if he was thinking about passing the puck on his goal, and almost before the question was finished, he said, "No, shoot always," in a very chummy manner. He also said he would see us in a couple of years to talk about his next goal. Absolutely love it. David, you are a beast, my friend. And thank you so much for all that you do. What do you have coming up? D Magazine or on your Star Stack?
Well, I'm going to do a prospect report on Thursday. Talk about how do you pronounce it, by the way? Ayrton Martino?
Yeah, God.
Ayrton Martino. Ayrton Martino. I should know because I watched the Clarkson games. Anyways,
Yes.
yeah, he's one of the guys that have been, now he's unsigned, but for those who don't know, he's, last I checked, top 5 in NCAA scoring, which was inexplicably above some really big names like Ryan Leonard and a few others. Now, of course, Martino is years older, right? So that is a really big advantage for him. Nonetheless, he has been absolutely dynamite. I think he's had something like, I don't know, like I want to say 15 points in like 4 games or something ridiculous like that. So yeah, I'll talk about some of the other players like Emil Hemming and so forth. But yeah, prospect report this week at the Star Stack, D Magazine. Not sure what topic is, but it'll be sometime next week.
That's awesome to hear. And for those of you that are listening to this who haven't heard the episode from earlier today, we sat down with content director and director of film scouting for Elite Prospects, Cam Robinson. He came out with a terrific article, The Anatomy of How Trade Deadline Deals Get Done, where he spoke to some former GMs, current executives in the league, some of the interesting behind the scenes, pull back the curtain stories of why GMs make these moves sometimes to keep their job, why rebuilding is so tough because they won't necessarily be there, how trades are made, how a lot of them look for familiarity as far as the teams that they want to deal with, how they won't deal with some teams. There's even stories in there of one scout hearing that a player cleared out his locker pretty quick after the season. On the radio, he heard that report. He goes back to his GM and they end up trading for that player. So there's just a lot of little things, and it really kind of gives a pull back the curtain. And what you realize, and Cam puts this out in his article, is that these are human beings, and human beings, make human being moves. So we kind of think of them as robots, and we match up the salary and say, why isn't this being done? So it's just a fascinating talk. So if you get a chance, please check out my interview today on Spits and Suds with the director of film scouting and content for Elite Prospects, Cam Robinson. So that's going to do it for another episode of Spits and Suds. Thanks again to David Castillo. Stars, big win tonight. We'll talk to you again tomorrow with another episode. And then after that, we'll be back on Thursday night after Calgary right here. Until then, have a great night, everyone.